Okay, we have warm-up number 4 for the final test. And so they're telling you again how to solve. So we're going to solve by factoring first. Solve by quadratic formula next, and solve by square roots there. So make sure solve at the end is going to be a specific numbers for your solution. So solve by factoring, I know I have to pick 2k and k. And then I got to try something for 12. I'm just going to try 4 and 3. I could do 6 and 2, whatever you want to try. So put my 3 there and my 4 there. Let's see if I pick the right one. So that's 3k and 4k. So that's 8k and 3k. Can I come up with -5? I can if that's negative. So I want to make that negative, that positive. So I have, and I double check to make sure I have a -12 when I multiply 3 and -4. So that's not the final answer. Some of you get that factored and you're all excited you factored it, which is great, but it's not the solution. So 2k equals -3, k equals -3 halves, and then k minus 4 equals 0. I just add 4 to both sides. K equals 4. So there's my two solutions. Again, you could solve that with quadratic formula if you had your choice. You should get the same answer. Okay, for the square roots, I'm going to get the squared term by itself. So I have m squared equals 38. I know it's not a perfect square, so I put it in my calculator. I'm going to find out the decimal value. If it doesn't give you a decimal, push the double arrow, that little double arrow button, and that will tell you the decimal. So you get k or m in this case, 6.16. Don't forget there's a plus or minus. This one says solve with quadratic formula. It always works. So if you have a choice and you can't figure one out factoring, you can do the quadratic formula if it's multiple choice and you're choosing. So we first have to get everything equal to 0. And then we put it in the formula. We have A, B, and C. There's my A. There's my B. There's my C. Just plug it in. Opposite of B, plus or minus square root B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. Double check to make sure you plugged it in right. 8 plus or minus, put all that inside this in your calculator, and you get square root of 16, which is 4. So your two answers, 8 plus 4 over 6, which is 2, 8 minus 4 over 6, which is -2, or 2/3, not negative. So that means that back here where I plugged everything in, where I plugged in A, B, and C, I could have factored it because we got nice numbers down here. So I could have picked 3B and B and 2 and 2 and to come up with -8. So those solutions should match your solutions there. Okay, this one we have a graph and we have an equation. Okay, so if they're telling you to use a graph, then you can assume certain numbers. If they're telling you to use an equation, you got to put it in the calculator. So use the graph to find how far the ground was when Saul made contact. How far off the ground? This is height above ground. So it says find y when we first hit the pinata, and that would be 5 feet. How high did the llama head fly? That's a vertex question. And so the llama head flies up and then down and hits the ground again. So it flew up to 13 feet. If it would have said how far did it fly, that's a different question. How far did the llama head go? Okay, so down here, it looks like it's at 9. But since it says use the equation, I need to solve. Solve means I'm either factoring this, which I don't want to, or I'm going to use the quadratic formula. I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Now just being careful. So now I got to put this in my calculator. So use the parentheses just like there are there. So negative 0.5 squared minus 4 times negative 0.5 times 5, and that's 10.25 all over negative 1. Square root of 10.25 is 3.2. So I have negative 4 plus 3.2 over negative 1, and negative 4 minus 3.2 over negative 1. So when I go to figure this out, I'm going to have two answers, and I need to, my picture might not be right. So it said to use the equation. So I'm going to negative 4 plus 3.2 is negative 0.8 divided by negative 1. Which is 0.8. And then negative 7.2 divided by negative 1, which is 7.2. How far did the llama head go? That's the distance in feet. It's 7.2. So that picture looks to me like it's off. And I don't know if they mess up the drawing or they're doing that on purpose to you. You can go back and check and say, well, I'm wondering about this vertex that I saw. The vertex is the opposite of B over 2A. And so my vertex looks right because that's 4. And so that one works. If you plug it back in, I'm assuming it's right. It just looks like that where it hits the ground is not sketched right. If you look, the distance between this point and this point is 10. So halfway between those should have been at 5, which is okay. So I'm going to go back and look and double check. Did I make a mistake somewhere? Opposite of b, b squared minus 4 times a times c. So let's just punch it in our calculator again to make sure it's right. And I look and I see, oh, I made an error. Can you see where I made the error at? Right here. That should have been a 4. So this number is going to be different. That's why you always check your work. Your answer should make sense. So b squared minus 4 times a times c, that square root is actually 5.1. So this should have been 5.1. So let's erase some of this work. Clean this up. Now I can check my two answers. So negative 4 plus 5.1 is 1.1 over negative 1. That's negative 1.1, which is back here. So that's right, but it's not one of my solutions because I can't go back in time. So I do -4 minus 5.1 over -1, which is -9.1, or is positive 9.1. So even though it looks like it hits at 9, it's actually at 9.1 because they told you to use the equation. Again, be careful plugging in numbers. You see where I made a mistake, you just got to make sure your answer makes sense and know what you're looking for. So the big questions, there's only 4 things they can ask you. Starting height, and that's when h is the constant for h, or you're setting t equal to 0 or x equal to 0, something like that, or looking at the equation. The thing goes up and it hits the ground. Right here are 2 answers. The x is either distance from the start or time, and the y of the vertex is, which a lot of times is h for height, that is the vertex height. And then when it lands on the ground, you're going to use quadratic formula. 4 questions. This uses the formula negative b over 2a. You saw how we went and used that just to double check. You can always check things. Those are the 4 main things you got to know for a new word problem. Then you just have to read it.